The stream is live.
The stream is live. Well, we can get going here in about now. It looks like it is time for the LinkedIn Live. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me, Josh Squires, with Bongo Learn, and my guest du jour, Karine Pagano. And today we are going to be covering her latest article from the Learning Guild, Expertise as a Catalyst for Building a Skills-Based Organization. And really, the focus of today is to kind of understand what kind of elements and insights that you are able to kind of cohesively pull together into this great article. And so, Karine, I'm gonna kind of leave it to you to introduce yourself, and I'd love for you to kind of unpack a little bit about maybe some high-level things, kind of an overall summary of the article,
Yeah,
and then just have a great little dialogue.
excellent. Yeah. Oh, I wasn't prepared to do an intro. Uh, how
Sorry.
do we do? How do we do that in 30 seconds? Hi. It's a little weird to intro myself to you because you know me. Um,
I know, but they don't.
yeah. So I've been working in skill. So full background. Been in L&D for decades. Super old. It's hard to say that out loud.
No,
Um,
no, no.
I'm older and wiser now.
That's right.
Um,
That's right. Fine
but
wine. Fine wine.
employer, besides having my own company, what is now 15 years ago, which is crazy. Um, highlights, lynda.com, LinkedIn, what is now LinkedIn Learning, D2L, Degreed, and most recently Wiley in terms of other employers. And now have been building a product on my own, working with Bongo, and taking on some additional kind of side projects that I've been working on, all related to skills. At least for the last 8 years, most of the work that I've done has been around how to think about measuring and communicating skills, both on the educator side early in my D2L days, but then really on the employer side and how to think
Nice.
about that. So this paper is a little slice of the culmination of all of those years of working with customers and working with technologies and thinking about how to do this.
So, what really kind of sparked the interest? Like, when did the light bulb kind of go off, saying, "Hey, like I need to think deeper about skills." I mean, and obviously you've been in the industry long enough
Yeah,
that you've heard the competency framework stories and horror stories and
yeah.
all that, and how did that kind of evolve into kind of the skills topic, and then really kind of where as an industry we need to really kind of zero in on kind of the shift into a skills-based organization.
Yeah. Um, a lot of my thinking and work really around skills started when I was at D2L. I had been working with them on building out a corporate offering in their product. And after I'd been there a couple of years, there was this question of how could we help educators and employers communicate better about the skills that were being developed for the workforce. So the initial catalyst was kind of this question of folks in education were talking about skills as competencies and like other terms, and kind of thinking about them differently than how employers were thinking about the skills that they needed for the workforce. And so that was really kind of my introduction to considering or thinking about this problem to solve. But after I left D2L, I was really squarely focused on the employer side, because what I realized was if you if we as a employer industry and corporate learning industry can't talk about the skills that we need, how are we ever going to ask educators to give us that information?
Right.
And so it was really a question of, well, we need to get our act together a little bit on on the um, on the workforce skills side in order to really be able to ask for what we need. So that kind of led me down this path of thinking about skills and skill data and what is a skill. And um, so last year, earlier in the year, I had been working at Wiley. I was working on kind of a variety of different businesses, assessment businesses, learning platforms. And I started to think about my collective experience over the last several years and where I thought there were gaps or opportunities. And so there were a couple of things that jumped out to me. One, we're not going to talk about today, but that is how can you add employee value into the skills conversation? Because a lot of these
Ooh,
initiatives
we should talk
are
about
talked
that
about.
today.
Okay, well, maybe we'll talk about
No,
that today then.
kidding.
Um, but that was one problem to
It's
solve.
a
Is
huge,
like
yeah, no, it's a huge issue.
how do you make skills relevant, meaningful, important for an individual to understand?
Right.
And how do you even go about that? So
Yep.
that was one area that I was really started to think a lot about and have curiosity about, and we can certainly talk about that. The other was um, how do we get better skills data?
Yeah.
And how do we do that at scale?
Right.
Because what I had seen and that was kind of the onus for this paper is to do kind of the research on, well, what are people doing broad scope?
Right.
And then start to think about how we need to evolve or think about that for the future. Because now I've worked literally with hundreds of organizations and talking about skills and how they're thinking about doing this and where they're getting stuck. And a lot of the technologies that are available, skills intelligence platforms, skilling platforms, all of those platforms kind of take on an angle of um, the skills kind of complex market, but very few had been focused on skill validation and skill data,
Right.
like generating that data. We're seeing some more folks in the market for sure that are starting to think about how to do that, from inferring skills all the way to like, deeper. We can talk about Bongo and how they're approaching it, but there's kind of now a lot more conversation around, well, if we don't have good data, it's impossible to fuel any
Right.
technology or system. So we kind of have to figure out this data question. So I've been
Well,
doing a lot of
let's
thinking in
let's
that area.
unpack that data question a little bit. I mean, because
Yeah,
I think that that's an area that a lot of organizations struggle with. I know, I every organization previously I've worked with, it's been one of those kind of preeminent things. If we're looking at learning technology platforms, LMSs, LXPs, a lot of the data that's given doesn't necessarily indicate proficiency at something. It just
right.
indicates doneness with something,
Or activity.
um, or activity.
Yep. Yeah.
Happy Sheets. That
Right.
got 5 smiles.
Yeah.
But that
I
that
mean,
doesn't mean that.
honestly, people like, well, I want to tell this funny story. It's not that funny, but
I'll laugh politely. Don't worry.
thank you. So, when I was at Degreed, my title when I first started there was VP of Skills, which is super fun and doesn't mean anything outside of that context, but
I mean,
it
as
was
long as you can use it to pay the bills, then you got full BC Boys street cred.
right. I know. And I wanted my I we this is another side note. We had a user conference, and I wanted they asked me what I wanted my intro music to be, and I said, "She's got skills." And then they played it, and then they listened to it, and they were like, "You can't do that again." Anyway, um, my poor event managers who were like, "Oh, Corrine, no." So
No.
I had to be pre-qualified with any music I recommended in the future. Um, so Degreed, thinking about building skills infrastructure. I'm super proud of the work that I did there and the team, and had super smart people working on how to solve that at Degreed. But what we realized was some of what organizations are struggling with right now is like, how do you know someone has a skill? Like, how do you actually validate that? And we started to look at all of the data that was coming
Right.
into that system and thinking about, like, well, does this indicate a skill? Does this prove a skill? And so I came up with this term called skill signals. And I
Yep.
wrote up a whole description about, like, maybe this isn't proof of a skill completely, but it's an indicator or kind of a signal that someone might have the skill. And I wrote up this whole pitch deck about skill signals and how to think about it and talk about it, and how that we could start to aggregate skill signals to build confidence that someone has a skill at,
Yep.
hopefully at a proficiency level. And I rolled it out and everybody hated it internally. And they were like, nobody's going to know what a skill signal is. How are we going to explain this? Like it was this whole big thing. And I was like, no. Like maybe it's not the right word, but it's the right idea.
Right.
And now I've been talking to a bunch of different folks that work at different companies and they all call them skill signals. And I was like, oh, thank goodness it caught on. So that's my secret claim to fame is at some point I coined this phrase skill signals and now I hear other people saying it and I'm like very, very happy that it caught on because I think that's one of the things that actually that concept of a single data point can't prove something, especially a low validity data point, but it can actually be aggregated with other data points to build a picture or to tell a story.
Right.
Yep.
Well, so let's unpack that a little bit more too, because I mean, like first, I'd love to get kind of your expert, even though you may only be a dabbler in skills, you seem to be a very proficient person. So what is this skill? Exactly. I looked at it for a brief amount of time. So what is this skill? And kind of walk me through the process of kind of this whole kind of skill signal thing that you've now kind of let free into the marketplace and is starting to be used. So we've got kind of the classical definition of a skill, but from the Crean perspective, what is a skill? And then how do we unpack that into something that we can use in any sort of intelligent way in the L&D marketplace?
Yeah, you're going to be super disappointed with my very elaborate definition. Because when I talk about a skill, like a skill to me is something you can do.
Yeah.
Like it is literally a descriptor of something that you can do. And I think this leveling, I love the thumbs up. This
back at you. It's working. It's working.
Does it hurt? I am the queen of making little emoji things go off and not knowing that I'm doing it. So skills. If a skill is something that you can do, what I've seen is that a lot of organizations, ontologies, or kind of their library of skill terms, if they haven't invested in a full ontology, tend to be either at the skill level or above it, which I usually call that like a capability area. So I'll give you an example. If I'm trying to think of a really good example. I have a slide on this. I should have had this on the ready.
Queued up.
I know. I should have queued it up. If a skill is something you can do, like a capability area is something like leadership.
Yep.
Or let's say content marketing, to give a very specific example.
Right.
Content marketing is kind of a capability area. And then under content marketing are a whole bunch of skills that may be writing skills. It can be related to communication. It could be something around event planning. It could be a whole bunch of project management, a whole bunch of things could fall under that capability area. And so my kind of maybe my little bias or dirty little secret behind the scenes is I don't think it actually matters.
Okay.
Where
Tell us more.
I don't think it matters actually where organizations are defining things. Like my classic example is one of the top skills that organizations always want to track is leadership.
Yeah.
And if you think about leadership, it's way too big to be a single skill.
Right.
There's lots of things that contribute to someone being a really strong leader. And you can break that down into smaller subsets and then collect evidence of each of those areas that kind of roll up into this idea of leadership. Okay. But if someone wants to track leadership as a skill within their organization, I think that's okay, as long as you understand the pieces that roll up into leadership and you think about that. So that's where I think a lot of organizations get stuck, because they're like, we have to figure out the right terms at the right levels and the right like infrastructure of all of these pieces. The beauty of
age-old competency mapping.
Yeah, like the beauty of the technology that's out there right now is that a lot of that will just do it for you.
Right.
And so before we were talking about LLMs and AI, there were skill similarity services, and there were lots of machine learning models that could learn over time and like better understand how skill labels or any term
Right.
label is related to each other.
Right.
And so while the normal kind of HR L&D person doesn't necessarily need to know all the inner workings of those systems of like how it's doing the data science
Sure.
and the data sciencey stuff to magic to make that happen. The reality is if you have a good set of list of what your organization wants to track, a lot of those services will kind of break it down for you. Um,
Got it.
but a lot of companies get stuck in trying to think about answering that question, what is a skill? And is this a skill or is this not a skill? And at what level is this thing? And you could spend years sorting through the the semantics and the, asking everyone's opinion and getting everyone aligned. And in that time, all of those skills have changed and evolved. And so part of the issue with skill data is that it's constantly moving, it's constantly
Right.
evolving, and this question of defining a skill is going to constantly evolve as it changes too. So
Well, I mean, it's a good answer. I mean, I think just kind of replay what you said is, I mean, a skill is basically a concept around the art of doing something. Now,
yeah,
the individual disparate tasks of doing that will change with advancing technology, or
yeah,
before driving a forklift is very important. Now, monitoring your robot drive that forklift could be more important.
right,
The
yep,
job to be done is still getting done. How we're actually assessing whether competent or not you are on it, I guess, is a moving target. So
yep,
in the paper, you mentioned, there's some conversations around kind of the qualifications, certifications, degrees.
yep,
How, like, within an employment framework, within an HR framework, learning framework, where do you see kind of the intersection of technological change, kind of your credentialing
yeah,
layer, and kind of some of the newer stuff like micro credentials, badges, and a lot of the work that we're doing in L&D around skills. I mean, like, how does all that bumble play together? Do we care about it? I mean, no, kids, stay in school, don't drop out of university. Mom and dad paid a lot of money for you to be there. um but it is a question, right?
yeah. I mean, I think it's a great question. So, and many folks know in our industry that I have a lot of kids. So I think I think about that for
One
my
or
kids,
two.
a couple kids here or there. Um, yeah, I think there is still value in higher ed. Um, I think it highly depends on, and this is what I tell my kids. So you're getting my mom advice right now. I think it really depends on the type of work you want to do, how you want to spend your days, and the life you want to live.
Right.
Some people, I think historically, everybody just went to college because you were like, well, if I want to get a job in an office or a job doing something professional, like I have to go get a degree. I don't think that's necessarily true for all areas anymore,
Right.
but I do think that there's value in higher ed degrees. Does that mean that everyone needs to go to college in order to have a successful career? No. And I think that's one of the things that I see shifting, that there are different models of crafting a really successful career and really life, because we're talking about people here, right? Like these are like people who are trying to figure out like what life do I want to live and how do I want to spend my days? And so those those kind of variables are, I think, weighing more heavily in the decision of is higher ed the track that I need to move forward to get there or not. And I see more and more examples of people who are like, I could get skills faster by starting with apprenticeship programs or doing
Right.
like smaller upfront degrees and then getting work experience and thinking about how to manage that. We saw it with the rise of boot camps and the software development side. There was such a demand for those skills that, like, how do you get people tracked faster? And we could have
Right.
a whole debate about whether getting a 4-year degree in software engineering is better or different than going to a boot camp. And I think there are pros and cons for both. It ultimately comes down to like your life track and how
Right.
you want to and the obstacles you'll face in either path you take. And
Well,
we're
I mean,
seeing that with more and more job roles and careers, I think now
right.
that there are options beyond getting a four-year degree to kick
Well, and
off your
I think the big challenge with it, right, is there's a lot of questions on is it a good investment, right?
yeah,
And that's a whole nother podcast, and I can put on my faculty hat. And we can talk about that. But really, kind of a big question I see all the time in our industry is AI is going to change everything, or this technology is going to disrupt everything, or
yeah,
blockchain is the new AI, is the new this, which is the new this, and it's all going to change, right? So as we're looking at kind of skills today, so the university degree, I guess, kind of fast forwards you on a couple kind of core box tickings, like you probably write, you can probably read,
yep,
there's certain competence levels that you walk in the door with, right?
yep,
But do I need to write and read if I can just tell ChatGPT to do what I want it to do and read it back to me?
yeah.
We don't need to debate that, but yes, you need to read. Again, any kids listening, um, but it is more
ChatGPT
on
is not that
what do we.
smart, y'all.
I know, it hallucinates a lot.
Like talking
you
to a
know,
toddler. Like you just got to
listen,
keep cooking it.
exactly. But you know, why are skills important in the workforce? Why is this kind of
Yep.
credentialing or mapping or tracking of it? And that's really kind of you know the necessity that we need to solve, right? Why do
Yeah.
we need to solve it? How do we need to evolve it? And then what do these signals mean?
So I think part of the reason why the question around education is an important one is because the pressure that's been put on everyone is around speed because of the rate of change,
Right.
specifically around technology and what that means for what skills you need to be successful and to run a business or an organization. And at this point, any industry. I mean, I think we've seen pressure in some industries earlier, like the financial industry certainly had even several years ago, we're going through a like how do we transform? Like we know that our businesses are changing, our models are changing, technology is changing, it's affecting everything. How do we best prepare for this to stay
Right.
relevant and successful? I
Absolutely.
think now we're seeing it in pretty much every industry that
It's ubiquitous
across the
now.
board, we are, as I like to reference, I've said this in a few conversations with friends, like we're at the beginning of the internet days again, where like
100%.
everybody's experimenting with building your own web pages with the flashy logos and spinny lights
Yes.
and and we're
Wingdings is the best font.
yes, right? Like wait, so we're early days, we're dial-up modem days right now,
Yep.
like of
Yep.
figuring
Yep.
out how to work with these tools, think about the implications and what they mean, wait to see how everything shakes out. Obviously, when the internet became more widely accepted, adopted, and used by businesses, it 100% transformed how we were doing everything.
Yep.
Everything, all systems,
But it took a
email.
bit. It took a
I don't
bit.
the old people and the me and other people are like, we remember when there was no email. Like it's like almost unfathomable now to think about the interoffice memo envelopes where you used to send documents back and forth. But I worked when I was young, but I worked in those days before
Did you have
before
like
like
one of those phones that was like attached to a wall?
oh heck yes. With the little cord and you couldn't get too far. You tried to
Right?
hide
And
from
like
your
you couldn't like
parents
take it with
underneath
you in the
the table.
car?
Talk to your friends? Yeah, 100%. I was trying to explain party lines to my kids the other day, and they were like, "It's like a group chat," and I was like,
Yeah, kind
"Kinda."
of. Yeah, I guess.
But I think it's like that's where we are, right? Like
Yeah.
we are at the beginning point of what will absolutely be a evolution revolution of work.
Yeah.
I think it will change a lot of things. I don't think we'll all be sitting around now trying to figure out how to be poets because, you know,
Mhm.
AI is doing our jobs. I don't think that that's true. um,
Idiocracy will not make a full comeback.
no, because
Maybe.
at the end of the day, and while obviously there are some extreme scenarios on what the potential is and the possibility for, I mean, my family likes Wall-E, so we often talk about that as a reference point, right? Like,
Yep.
what happens to humanity when the things that we used to have to spend time doing, we no longer have to spend time doing
Right.
those things, and what do we then end up spending our time doing?
Star Trek Prime Directive.
Right. We will still have things that we will be focused on and doing, and they're going to be different things, and we'll have different tools. I
Right.
mean, calculators were supposed to just ruin us from being able to do math, but we're cool now with calculators. We've adapted and we've accepted
Kinda.
them into the fold, and like we don't even think about it anymore. But
My freshman algebra teacher still hated them. I don't know why.
right, I mean, and that's the reality. I do worry because I'm getting older, and I, and getting into the shaking my fist at the kids stage. Even though I know the lingo, I know what Riz is, I know what the phantom tax is. I'm cool. I'm hip with the kids.
I don't want to
Only
know.
because of my
I'll
daughter.
let you. Okay.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that later.
Yeah. I don't want to know.
But at the same time, like they are entering a world where some of the things that we thought were core skills and competencies that we needed to develop are really no longer needed, relevant. I mean, when the school stopped teaching cursive writing, I realized I could like write notes that my kids couldn't read.
Secret language.
Secret
Doing
language.
it.
Yeah. Pro tip for the parents.
Yeah. They still teach cursive in France, so I'm out of luck on that one.
See,
No.
good heads up in case I think I can use my secret language in France. But it's those types of things that I think
Right.
are at biggest risk. I think about so quick story. I don't know when we have to end, so I'm just going to keep talking.
Well, do this one. I've got one question to wrap it up, and then we can be done. I don't want to keep people too long.
So one of the things that was a big philosophical question. So way back in my lynda.com days, I worked with K-12 schools all the way up through all high education institutions, through corporate government, all sizes, like basically any organization we worked with. And so I met with a lot of those customers and talked about their needs and was thinking about like their core function in society, really, like what purpose were they serving, especially the education institutions. And we worked with community colleges, and then we worked with like Ivy League schools. And there was this very different thinking and approach to how they created curriculum and thought about how to prepare people for the world and work. And the Ivy Leagues were really focused on theory and philosophy and like getting people thinking about systems and kind of building thinking skills. And they really didn't focus on job skills at all. So like at lynda.com, we were teaching like very specific skills around design and and they were like, this is great because we don't teach that stuff.
Yep.
And so we expect our people to learn that because we're going to
figure it out.
Philosophy. When I worked with community colleges, they were like, we teach people the skills. Like, you want to use the software? We're like preparing you for the specific things you need to do at work. And it always struck me that both was needed.
Yep.
But that we had kind of separated out these two types of institutions into like either you get the theory and the philosophy, but you don't get the specific skills, or you get the skills, but you don't necessarily have the background in philosophy. And going back to the software engineering versus boot camp stage, it's the same challenge that I think we face. And so in thinking about skills and validating skills and how do we develop skills, the things that will be important as technology evolves are some of the philosophical basis of thinking and how to like work through problems and work through those things, because the technical skills are going to change. But we also need mechanisms for teaching those technical skills. And so we are in this super interesting kind of evolution of figuring out what's more important, and the answer is both. and we've got to think about them in different ways. Because I think if you focus too far in one direction and not the other, gaps will be exposed over
Yeah.
time,
No, for
right?
sure. So just kind of a wrap up kind of question, but it's also kind of a leave behind as far as kind of looking forward. If you had to kind of summarize a couple key strategies that you could share with an organization who's trying to build kind of navigate this landmine or
Yeah.
minefield of skills, like
Yep.
what do I do, Green? I'm Jon Snow. I know nothing. What do I do?
Yeah. So I have opinions, shockingly. Um,
Share them.
it's amazing. One, will say this till my dying days. Um, Definitely always start with what is the business problem you're trying to solve. I think organizations that go into this journey with we want to be a skills-based organization as the problem to solve kind of miss the boat on why to even embark on these efforts.
Yeah, the board
And
of directors is going to look at that and say, huh?
well, we in my my lovely L&D and HR colleagues in this pool, we have a history of moving down paths or focusing on initiatives or things that aren't directly tied to business value, and a
Right.
lot of like systems approach type of things, a lot of things that are really related to skill. Like this whole idea of skills isn't new. Us calling it skills is
No,
kind of new, but this has been around
kind
for a
of.
very long time. And my caution is for organizations that are starting to think about this to really think about what business problem do you want to start with solving? And then what are the skills that are relevant to that business problem and focus in there. The second piece is no surprise. You've got to really do kind of analyze your data. What do you already have? What mechanisms do you have for collecting data about these
Yeah.
skills that are related to this problem and what's missing? And I've got whole like framework. We could do a whole nother section just on like the
Well,
frameworks around thinking about skills because
I was going to say any leave behinds that you can offer, and
yeah, I
and by
think
the way, the article audience is free. You just have to
yeah,
register for the e-learning guild thing, and so you can see what it is that she's referencing.
the
Sorry,
Learning
guys.
Guild is offering it for free, but you need to give
Give
them
your
your name.
details.
Yeah. Um, so understand the business problem, 1.
Yeah,
Understand the skills related to that problem, 2. Understand the
yeah,
data you already have, 3. Close the gap on the data you don't have because inevitably that will be
yep,
um, a challenge in the system. And then the kind of fifth part is how do you collect that data now in an ongoing way?
right,
Because the first
right.
data collection kind of is setting the baseline. And
Yep,
then in order to measure improvement, then you have to like see the delta from
yep,
there.
yep.
So that's my 5-step recommendation
I love
approach
it.
to getting started. And and you will eventually become a skills-based organization if you take on business problem by business problem. And at
Yep,
some point, it will be important for you to say, like, okay, how do we like share this data across? And
right.
we could have a conversation about internal mobility and like kind of the talent side of skill data. We could talk about the learning and skill development side of skill data and the benefit of understanding skills there. We didn't get to the employee value piece today, but
Not
I'm sure
yet.
we'll come back to
We
it at
will.
some point. But the building blocks of like I solved it in this use case and I'm going to add another use case and I'm going to add another use case and now suddenly everyone's like, "Oh, we want to do this more broadly or we need to like this is really working to solve these specific problems. Can we do this at scale and evolve that?" Is really the way that these initiatives stayed tied to the business value and
Right.
continue to be a strategic investment rather than a project that HR L&D is working on, right? Because ultimately,
Which we've
like,
seen multiple attempts at over the past few decades,
and then you're
and
most
they've.
likely to be cut. Like the budget
Yep,
will be cut if it's not tied to the
absolutely.
business value. And so those are the things like there's ways to do this. There's ways to move forward that make this kind of a business imperative because you
Right.
start to show value at every stage of how you're impacting the business and giving better insights.
I think we have our next LinkedIn Live, Green,
Great.
is,
Could talk about
I mean,
that.
how do we actually tie skills to business value?
Yeah.
And let's talk some frameworks. So
Cool.
thank you very much for
Yeah.
joining me on this one. I will definitely work with you behind the scenes to see if we can plan out that next one, because I do think it's a necessary thing. I mean, I think a lot of times you're absolutely right. Our colleagues in HR and L&D, they, it's dog with a bone, got a mission, we're going to do the
Yeah.
mission, and then seeing the forest from the trees becomes really difficult. And the
Yeah.
people who sit outside of HR and L&D don't care. They have dollars that, or financial units of currency that
Yeah.
are tied to initiatives.
Yep.
And if we can't connect those two dots, then yeah, sorry, bye. Um,
Everybody is really just looking for more data to make better decisions.
that's it. That's
And
it.
at the end of the day, that's why skills-based organizations, like, are gaining traction because the promise is that there's more data to make more informed and better business decisions. So if you don't start with what
Yep.
are the initial business decisions that we're solving for and build from there, then you're kind of disconnected from the whole end game anyway. And so
Right.
thinking about it from a business decision, building a business decision solution path is really it's how we get there.
Well, I love it. Thank you again for coming on, and we'll talk again soon. Bye, guys.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Bye.